Welcome to the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. My name is David Wheatley. We're here to talk leadership in small, bite-sized and practical chunks. Enjoy. This is one of our First Friday episodes, and if you've not come across First Friday yet, go to humanergy.com where you can register for our First Friday sessions. First Friday of every month at noon Eastern Time, you can join about a 15-minute Zoom leadership conversation, a snippet of which we hear today, presented by my colleague Jim Marshall. And we're looking for the second month in a row, we're looking at transformative discussions, those difficult conversations, and how we have them. Here's Jim.
Greetings, everyone. I am really thrilled to have a chance to talk with you about transformative discussions today. And let me lay out for you the focus or the goals that I've set for our conversation as a Humanergy community. On the one hand, I'd like to inspire, and on the other hand, I'd like to provide a practical guide or roadmap, if you will, on what to do, practically speaking, when you find yourself in a transformative discussion. And on the inspire side of things, I'd like to inspire us to choose, we'll talk a little bit about what this means, but choose the green path, to choose to engage in trying to resolve the issues that come up where there are things that are, holding us back in relationships or in life and work, where transformative discussions are thrust upon us. We face this choice to choose to engage or not. And my goal in hosting a conversation about transformative discussions is to inspire us to more often choose to do that. Let me recap part one. We used what great teams do great, and this is a dense model with a lot of information. It's actually available on the resources section of humanergy.com if you want to look at it. But we used it to talk about how do we find ourselves in transformative discussions? And the idea here is we're doing work, you could say we're doing life, and suddenly an issue pops up. Sometimes it's a positive thing, an opportunity. Often it's a problem. It's my sense that something's not right, or a ball got dropped, or there is something that just, people are upset or frustrated, something's gone wrong. And at that moment that we are aware there's an issue, all of us face this choice. Will I go the green path or will I go the red path? And then we spent some time talking. The main feature of part one of transformative discussions was how do we approach them? Once we're thrust into them, how do we approach them? The answer, the idea is the green path. The green path is marked by being caring, honest, and direct. It's a three-legged stool. If you don't have all three legs, the stool doesn't stand up. You need all three, being caring, honest, and direct. It's marked by listening, by sharing perspectives, by being data-driven, by focusing forward on the solution and less on backward, on the past, or on the problem. The red path, on the other hand, is marked by, it's when we become aggressive and we go on the attack. It's when we avoid conflict or difficult conversations. We might ignore, we might accommodate, we might blame or become defensive. The bottom line of the red path is whatever we're doing, it's not helping the situation to get better. Even if we're just trying to maintain the status quo or avoid or ignore it, inevitably, sooner or later, that issue is going to get worse. So the idea of transformative discussions, one, was how do we find ourselves into these discussions? And then what do we do when how do we approach those conversations? How do we be on the green path? Today, I want to talk even more practically in terms of what process do we put both ourselves and the group of people who are involved, whether that's one-on-one or whether it's a group of people. So before we jump into that roadmap, though, I want to talk about three principles for transformative discussions, because I think they will really set the stage for why we need a roadmap, and they will set the stage for why it's important for us to recommit ourselves, to choose to engage, to choose to get on the green path. So principle number one, transformative discussions are inevitable. You'll hear me use conflict, difficult conversations, crucial conversations. There's a lot of names that this goes by, but the idea is when I'm in a transformative, it's inevitable when I am in relationship with others, when I am in working life with others, it's inevitable that there will be issues that pop up that need resolution. Principle number 2, transformative discussions are scary. And number 3, they're an opportunity. And I want to just briefly unpack each of those. Some of you will know back in the day, I started my career mentoring and guiding and leading college students. That was the first place that I was kind of transforming teams and people and culture. That's when I first heard someone say conflict is inevitable. And as often as I have communicated and said, really difficult conversations are inevitable. When you have people, you're going to have times where issues pop up. I get the sense that heads nod in agreement. But I want to ask you, and I ask myself, if I pause and I think about how often do I see people acting as if they are avoidable? In other words, how often do I see myself or those around me on the red path? And the answer that I come up with is too often. I can't tell you how many times I'm in a conversation with a client and I'm saying, do you think that that's something that you could go and talk to them about? And the answer sometimes, oftentimes, is no, no way. I just don't see that going well at all. There's no way. And that's a red path choice that I'm going to avoid, or I'm going to accommodate, or I'm going to, whatever I'm going to do, I'm not choosing to engage in it. And I don't mean to sound really critical or mightier than thou about that. I think there's actually good reasons. One of the reasons why we end up on the red path, or why I end up on the red path, is because of number 2, that they're scary. And I think of scary like a continuum. If I find myself thrust into an issue, into a transformative discussion, it might be on the one end of the continuum that I'm just nervous. We all share a fear of the unknown. I don't know how this is going to go. I don't know how they're going to react. So I'm just it's some of that not again kind of mentality of, oh man, I find myself in one of these hard conversations again. In the middle, it's some level of anxiety, some level, I'm a little bit worried about how this is going to go. And then on the end, and I think this is real for some of us at some points in our life, it's terrifying. It's petrifying. I mean, it's the most extreme kind of, I don't know if they're going to yell. I don't know if it's going to ruin the relationship for all time, if we'll never speak again, if it might become physically violent. Those are all possibilities in times when we find ourselves in difficult conversations, in stressful conversations, stressful situations. I was recently talking with my youngest daughter, who just finished her freshman year of college. We were catching up about her college friend group and her high school friend group. And the bottom line is, she was telling me, she actually said, I don't even think those two should be friends anymore. And I was like, oh, really? And she's like, they just cannot find their way into like a harmonious relationship. And we were kind of laughing. And one of the things that she sort of flippantly said is, not everyone has the benefit of having a leadership coach for a dad who talks constantly about resolving conflict and engaging in the conversation and that kind of thing. So we were kind of chuckling about her upbringing. And then it just hit me that I said, Vivian, if you had zero lived experience of it being safe and okay to get on to what we call the green path, to engage in the conversation, if you've never seen anyone do it, if you've never done it, or if you've had experiences where you did it and it went terrible, it was scary, then why would you ever choose to engage in that conversation? Why would you ever choose to get off the red path and get on the green path? So I really do think, there's a bodily physical response around cortisol and adrenaline, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. These things are going off in our minds and in our hearts, in our emotional world, when we find ourselves thrust into those conversations. And it does make it hard to get on the green path. And I'll end on the principle of it's an opportunity. Back in the day, working with college students is when we started coining the phrase, on the other side of a well-resolved conflict is a deeper and stronger relationship. And I don't know about you, I'm guessing if you look at the relationships that you prize the most in your life, you will see in the wake of it that there are transformative discussions that have gone well. And you've come out on the other side with a better bond and a deeper connection, and a more of an ability to understand one another and to, get the value and the benefit of those relationships, whether it's working or whether it's in your personal life. So all that to say, there's a lot of reasons why when we get into that moment, it's a tough choice, red path or green path. And now I want to talk a little bit about that roadmap, this transformative green path. It's the idea, there's 3 columns here. The steps that we go through is the y-axis, or the vertical, if you will, and there's 8 of them. And then there's this principle across the top, first me, then us. And the idea is that there's a power and a helpfulness to, I spend time introspectively reflecting on these 8 steps for myself before I ever engage in the dialogue or the discussion with the other party or the other parties who are a part of that transformative dialogue. And I want to take a minute in the time that remains, and I want to walk you through the transformative green path. The idea is this is what we do in a very practical way. You may not always need to park on all 8 steps in your transformative discussion. However, what I would say is they are really helpful, especially if I'm doing the work introspectively before I engage in the dialogue, to work through all 8 steps as preparation for when we get into the dialogue. So this is what we do to transform the discussion, transform me and then us. The first me, that self or other understanding, it's where I ask, what are my red path stories? What's my baggage? What's my self-justifications? This is where it's like I'm acknowledging there is a red path. Sometimes I'm tempted, especially when an issue comes up, to be upset with somebody else, to blame them. I'm thinking, you know, they're the problem, they're being ridiculous, they're being a jerk, whatever it might sound like. This is where and I think somebody said in the chat, how am I contributing? How am I a part of this? What am I bringing to the table? And this is where we do that work. And I was thinking, how do I illustrate this? And I thought, you know, I've always been the youngest born of 3 boys in a relatively kind of athletic, competitive upbringing. And so I can't tell you how many times I asked my mom, am I better than Joe and Mike at this when they were my age? You know, I have been trying to compete and win and prove myself all the time. But when it comes to transformative discussions, that drive to win, that doesn't necessarily put me on the green path, or it's not necessarily the best mindset. So I might be thinking about, in what ways do I need to prove myself, and how's that not helpful here, and how do I need to, you know, regulate that as I go into the conversation, just as an illustration of what a red path story might be. Then the greater good, what's best for me, for the other, and for our relationship. For me, this is often the question, what am I trying to achieve here? And especially in the first me portion, I'm just dreaming and envisioning what is the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And it's useful to start thinking about what might that look like in this situation. Then care and safety. You'll see the words here. I remember that I'm working with a person and not a problem. And I find, and when I'm in this stage, it's like I'm reminding myself, this is a human being. I can't treat them otherwise. I need to treat them with the value, the dignity, the respect that they deserve. That's how I want to show up here. I remind myself to be calibrated. I control myself. I don't control them. I might be able to influence them. And the kind of caveat rider for me is always, I might influence them if I stay on the green path. I got to be on the green path, and that's my biggest chance of having any influence in this conversation. The other thing that I think it's worth pausing and talking about is power dynamics. This is the time where you take into consideration what's the power dynamics that are at play here. My contention is all of us have some level of power in all of the situations that we have. And if you look at me by virtue of my gender, my race, my geography, my education, or even positions and titles that I've held, I find myself, even if I don't feel like I have a ton of power or I know what to do, I have a lot of power. And the question that then I'm asking, or that we are asking ourselves, is, how do I create care and safety? How do I make this safe for me and take care of myself, which is a valid consideration? And then how do I take care of others and provide and create an environment that's going to feel like safe and caring, where we can have the best possible discussion? So you can see this is a really important component to consider beforehand, and then also to consider and to address when we're in the conversation. Then you've got mutual understanding, common ground, expanded ground, resolving differences, and the greater good solution. Last time I talked about how we move through understanding, agreement or disagreement into commitment. And this is just more in a more elaborated version of understanding to agreement to commitment. So in mutual understanding, how well do I understand this situation? What's my story, my facts, my feelings, my opinions, my assumptions? Common ground, it's helpful to think there's always more that we agree on than we think about, in a conflict. And so where do we agree? If I identify where we agree, then I'm naturally starting to also identify where we disagree. And that's the idea of expanded ground, because if there's areas where I'm identifying we don't agree and I dig in, I want more information. I want to understand more of what do you really need and want here, or why is it that you are advocating that we do this while I'm advocating that we do that. The magic is the more I dig in, sometimes the dialogue and that negotiation surfaces the solution by digging in deeper and looking for our expanded ground. Then, as the differences are identified, what do I need to say to be caring, honest, and direct to start to identify, here's the difference, here's the possible solutions that we're entertaining and we're negotiating. And then as we arrive at a decision or a solution, obviously I don't create the solution when I'm on my own, but I might be thinking, again, I'm envisioning that. Then I move over to the us, that self and other understanding. This is like a mindset, a self-regulation, maybe a talk tape, if you will, where I'm talking to myself about myself and being aware to not be pulled into the red path. And then again, you've got choices to make. It's not dictating exactly what to say, but that if I find myself as a guide or facilitator of this discussion, I might state that my intent, and I'm inviting all of us to the same kind of goal of, we want to achieve something that's best for the greater good, whatever that is. I'm not committed only to what I want. I want to try to find a solution. Somebody once said to me when I was young, the goal of conflict is not to win, it's to find a resolution. And that was mind-blowing because I did not live like that up to that point. And at this stage of introducing the conversation, we have this opportunity to remind people we're here to find a resolution. We're here to find a greater good solution. Then I can address care and safety. For me, that often sounds like saying, I care about you. I care about your perspective. I trust you, and I trust that you want to go after something that's best for the greater good. And I want to try to understand your perspective. Again, those are some of the things that we do to create care and safety. We might also consider where we host the conversation, or just any of those kinds of dynamics that might help people feel more safe, more comfortable. And then there's the process of, we're identifying, help me understand. I'm asking questions. Often a transformative discussion, when we slow down and before we respond, we summarize. Let me see if I've got what you're saying. Before I respond to that, let me summarize what I'm hearing. We identify our common ground. We agree on this. We identify, let's dig in a little deeper. Help me understand. Tell me more about why you're resistant to this idea that I'm proposing, or tell me more about what you need from me in this situation. Our difference appears to be this is the resolving differences section. What if we tried this? How do you feel about this as a solution? We're brainstorming and we're negotiating, tweaking and refining the idea of this solution. And when we land on something that works, then we work through that greater good solution. I think of this as often it's the who's doing what by when, to make sure that we go forward and we stay on the same page as we implement this solution. So I hope that provides that practical roadmap that, as you are trying to inspire yourself to choose to be on the green path, and provide you some guidance on how to choose to do that.
That was the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. My name's David Wheatley. For further information about Humanergy, go to humanergy.com or check out our latest book, What Great Teams Do Great, from all good bookstores. Have a good one. Stay healthy.